Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and coach. You're on the Steady Coach. And today I'm going to be answering another one of your questions as part of the ongoing Ask Dr. Yo series of unedited videos. I answer lots of the questions that you ask here in the comment section. So if you're interested in hearing more questions and answers just like this one, you can check out the playlist called Ask Dr. Yo, entire long playlist of all the questions and answers that I've recorded over time. So today's question came up in the coaching group, but I get asked similar questions frequently in the comment section, so I wanted to share the answer with everyone. The question is, hey Yonit, I have mold exposure or SIBO, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, or some other kind of toxin exposure, maybe previous history of Lyme disease. I'm working with functional medicine providers or holistic providers. Is this what's causing my chronic dizziness symptoms? And do I need to use all of these holistic treatment regimens, including, in many cases, some quite expensive supplements in order to recover from chronic dizziness symptoms? As you can probably tell, this is a thorny topic. So let me start by saying I am not an expert on any one of the things I just mentioned. I am an audiologist and I am a strength coach. And I would say at this point, I'm very well versed and well trained in the treatment of neural circuit dizziness and other symptom disorders. That does not make me an expert on SIBO or on mold exposure or what have you. However, there are some fundamental things that I believe about how chronic symptoms happen that makes me have a bit of an opinion on this. So I'm going to share my opinion because I frequently get asked, but I just want to say I completely respect your autonomy and I want you to try to trust yourself. Okay? Everything that I say here is, again, my experience and my clients' experiences. Just because I don't particularly agree with how someone might address things like this does not mean that you don't have the right to try to address it in the way that feels right to you. Okay? So let me start by saying that all symptoms are always biopsychosocial. So we've talked about this in previous videos, but biopsychosocial simply means that stuff happens in the body and the brain, and those things are really not separable from things that happened in the mind and in your social context. In other words, things that happen to you affect you on a physical level, on a chemical and physical level, and things that happen to you on a chemical and physical level also affect your mind and potentially your circumstances. Okay, so these things can't be truly untangled. However, in the case of neural circuit symptoms, we're way over on the psychosocial end of things, meaning what's driving these chronic symptoms, while they're based in biology, as I've talked about in previous videos, they are based in biology, meaning this is brain-based. These changes that are leading to symptoms are brain-based changes. We know this. Those changes are a software issue. They are being driven, they are being kept around, even though they're not working out well for you, primarily by psychosocial factors, by things that you can have an influence on, by anxiety and fear and stress and all those other things. Okay. So things like PPPD, for example, MDDS, vestibular migraine, we're way over on that side of things, not because the biology doesn't exist. Of course, biology is ultimately what's going wrong when you have symptoms, but it's going wrong because these other factors are keeping that problem around. Okay. So when people have a neural circuit dizziness problem, there is very often some kind of biological thing that happened that started the initial symptoms. A super easy example of this is those of you who've had BPPV or vestibular neuritis. Something goes wrong in that ear and you end up with symptoms. That is just a biological fluke that happened. That's a thing that happened biologically. But most people, when they have one of those things, with BPPV, once the BPPV is treated, the symptoms go away. With vestibular neuritis, once someone does vestibular rehab, the brain has time to readapt. You don't have symptoms anymore. When that doesn't happen, we can't blame chronic symptoms on that initial biological problem anymore, because most people who have those biological problems initially get better and don't have chronic symptoms. So this is where, again, a biological problem may have initially set off symptoms, but then your nervous system took over and your nervous system said, holy moly, this is super threatening. And it got stuck in a chronic symptom cycle. Again, all the other things that we talk about on my channel feeding into that. I believe that for many of you out there who had some kind of exposure to mold, for example, or SIBO issues, or again, Lyme disease, again, telling you I'm not an expert on those things, is that those things very, very well may have set off an initial biological response. Why wouldn't they? Right? But just because that's what initially set off symptoms doesn't necessarily explain why symptoms become chronic. Just because one of those things set off your symptoms doesn't mean that's why symptoms became chronic. So that's the first component of this, the chronicity. Why did symptoms become long-term? When bodies heal, tissue heals. If there is no damage to you, and again, if you've been diagnosed with one of these things, frequently there is no damage to be found. They can't actually quantify any damage because there often isn't any. And again, I'm saying that with full respect to those of you who did find a biological degenerative process or something. This does not include you. But for many of you out there with these diagnoses, that may have been the initial diagnosis, but that's not why you have chronic symptoms. So we can think of those things in many cases as a precipitating factor. And a precipitating factor simply means this is what turned that switch to on, but that's not necessarily what's keeping the switch on. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is that we don't know for sure that some of these things aren't what we call incidental findings. What that means is that when someone gets diagnosed with one of these things, it's because that person is sick. You're suffering. You went to a doctor. You've probably gone to many doctors. So you're an example of someone who is having symptoms and who gets diagnosed with this thing. We simply do not know how many people there are out there who've had the same exact kinds of exposures that you did and who did not become ill at all, or who never ended up with chronic symptoms. So to blame the symptoms or the chronic symptoms on something that we don't really have a good sense of what the incidence is through the entire population is a little bit worrisome to me. Okay. And again, I'm not in any way saying that we should deny that these things cause problems for some people. My question is always, okay, mold is pretty widespread. Why, if it's so widespread, why are more people not sick from mold? Right? That's a reasonable question to ask. So again, there's a bit of a confirmation bias. There's a bit of a bias in the sense that you're already sick when you go to a provider. If they dig long enough, they're going to find something wrong with you. They're going to find something to blame. And I think, and this is my opinion, that often they're blaming symptoms on things that might be relatively normal or much more common than we know. It's just that those people don't have symptoms, so no one ever finds out. Okay? I hope that point made sense. The problem here is that this often leads you, if you have one of these diagnoses, to a treatment regimen that generally reinforces the idea that there's something horribly, irreversibly, potentially wrong with you, and that you have to pay a lot of money and hyper focus on your diet, on your lifestyle, on supplements in order to get better. And I love health. I love the idea of making your stress bucket as robust as possible. I am 100% for all of you eating good, solid diets with lots of whole foods and taking vitamins if you need them. I'm 100% on board with that. That's not what happens when people are diagnosed with one of these things. They are given really strict, expensive, time-consuming regimens that cause them to focus even more of their attention on their symptoms, and they're consumed by fear. And guys, we know this fear, focus on symptoms, that's what drives symptoms. That's what drives chronic symptoms when they are a neural circuit problem. So not only could this kind of treatment regimen be unnecessary and maybe unnecessarily expensive, it can also actually make the problem worse. And I say this just based on my experiences with clients and my opinion. I fully respect you if you feel it's helping you and you need to address one of these issues. I give you my support. I don't care what it takes to get you better. Whatever it is, placebo, not placebo, treatment, not, I don't care. If you get better, I'm happy. But what I've seen so often is that it doesn't work because it's a neural circuit problem. Or it has a really nice placebo effect for a little while, so people feel a little better or a lot better for a little while. But they haven't addressed all these psychosocial factors we talked about at the beginning of this video. So the nervous system's still on high alert. And then another weird biological fluke thing happens and they're back to where they started, but way worse off because now they immediately get consumed by this fear that they have to go through that kind of regimen again. This is my same complaint about migraine diets, by the way. I probably should just do a separate video on that. So again, my take on these things is that just because they started the symptoms isn't an indication that they are making symptoms chronic. And just because you have a diagnosis like this doesn't mean it's not actually a normal abnormality. Doesn't mean that it's not just normal and you're having symptoms, but most people don't, which tells us it may not be the thing that's actually making symptoms happen. I hope this was helpful to all of you. And thank you for allowing me to share my opinion with you. I say this really with the desire to just help give you this perspective. If you have questions or comments on this, please drop them below. And I look forward to it, of course. You can also like, share, subscribe to my channel. If you're listening to this as a podcast, you can give it a follow. You can also leave us a 5-star rating. These things all help me reach more people, which is my mission. All right. Take care, everyone. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.